All right, everybody. It is 12:30 on Wednesday. This is when we go live and Be the Boss, Be Well. And I know I didn't even tell you guys it was happening. So for those of you who are new to the group, surprise. Um, but I promised you guys that I would be talking about the new dietary guidelines. So I'm teasing about it. I've sent out the first newsletter about it. I am so excited to be talking about it with you all. Um, so today I'm just calling it the first one, Dietary Guidelines Reset. This is why your body was right before policy caught up. And this is something that I discovered in my own health journey years ago, that when I tried to do everything that they said, I got sick. And when I went back to what I learned in college, so we know these things already, I was able to heal. So the really cool thing that I have to say here is, have you ever had my experience where you did all of the nutrition advice and you're like, oh, that's all great. I'm doing it. And yeah, my body ain't listening. It's not catching the memo here. I don't feel great. Um, so that's where I really want to start today, because what just happened with the new dietary guidelines is actually kind of a big deal. It is a completely different way of approaching it than we had since the very, very first dietary guidelines, which were being drafted at the end of the 70s and implemented in the 80s. Um, new guidelines, are they perfect? No, it's policy. I don't think policy is ever perfect. Yikes. Um, but it is very different, and it's a very different perspective. So, if you've been doing work with me for a while, or if you've been in this group for a while, you might actually notice something a little funny. I think I alluded to it recently. Um, well, nothing in my programs really needs to change, which is pretty darn cool. And I'm not sitting here patting myself on the back. I wasn't psychic or anything. It's science, okay? The reason why what I do works isn't because I was able to anticipate guidelines. No, the guidelines should be following what our body is already doing, and we're getting closer to that now. So I want to talk a little bit about why these guidelines matter. Um, you know, um, this isn't about the old guidelines being evil or wrong or corrupted or anything like that. They were built on an incomplete model. They were really excited about it. They were trying to do their best, but they were actually trying to accomplish a lot of things at the same time that kind of, you know, canceled each other out, worked against each other a little bit. And of course, if your model is off, your conclusions are going to be off too. And even if your intentions are good, and I do believe that prior policies were intended to be good. Um, so let's see. I'm just hoping that you guys can hear me all right here. I think you can. All right. So I just want to give you a little bit of background. For about 40 years, nutrition policy was dominated by one single big idea, that if we reduce saturated fat and cholesterol, heart disease will go away. And idea was called the diet heart hypothesis. And it was plausible. It seemed scientific, and it became policy very fast. Now, what a lot of people don't know is at the same time that hypothesis was coming to light, there was another one that focused more on sugar. And that one was also, in fact, more correct. But guess what? It's all in who you know. And one was a very popular scientist with the government in at the time, and the other wasn't. And sometimes politics just gets in the way of some good science. All right, it happens. But the thing that scientists care about is this: hypothesis is not the same thing as a biological law. But once it became policy, everything else had to fit inside that box, and everybody else scrambled around to support that. And unfortunately, it became very, very entrenched to the point where it was almost dogma. Um, so, what did we do in that case? We told people to fear fat. We stripped fat out of foods, and then we replaced it with refined carbohydrates, sugars, industrial processing. And that's how we ended up things with low-fat cookies and sugar-laden yogurts with health halos, right? Where we're able to put on labels that said things were adhering to a policy, but that didn't ever really translate to health. And in fact, we're seeing ever increasing amounts of disease. And so we have to wonder, well, what changed, and let's go back to the drawing board a little bit, which people have been trying to do. Um, so add that into a population. Everybody actually did what they were told. Everybody says, well, if you just did what I said, you wouldn't be sick. Well, that's not true because um, you can actually follow the guidelines, prior guidelines very well and still end up ill. So what gives, right? It wasn't a personal failure. It was a model failure, and it's what happened. Um, this is the part where nutrition science went, that's weird for about 30 years, okay? And kept trying to push it, right? So while fat intake was going down, what we actually saw in the data was that obesity was going up. Type 2 diabetes was going up. Metabolic disease became the norm and not the exception. For real, most people are metabolically unhealthy now. And what really started to, I think, raise the eyebrows in the research world was that most people who have heart attacks don't actually have sky high cholesterol. They discovered this back in 2017 with a study where they were looking at people being admitted into the hospital, and 75% of them had cholesterol in LDL cholesterol in ranges that wouldn't raise any eyebrows at all. So then you got to start thinking, that should be a flashing neon sign that something else is driving that risk of heart disease and metabolic health problems. And maybe it isn't just that LDL cholesterol that they've been telling us about. And you're definitely still going to have people that are thinking, okay, that's really a big deal. And there is an aspect of it that has truth, but it isn't stand on its own. So something else that influenced it turned out to be things like insulin resistance and chronic inflammation and blood sugar swings. And really, the big one that this new dietary guideline addresses, ultra-processed food intake. Metabolic health isn't just lipid mathematics, okay? Um, so I think this is where we really start to flip the script with the new dietary guidelines. Um, we stopped obsessing over single nutrients, you know, protein, fat, sugar, salt, and all of those types of things. Stopped focusing on that and started really taking a look at food quality and dietary patterns. And that actually is a big deal, right? Because the prior guidelines were really focusing on limits, always limiting. I mean, you literally had to have a nutrition calculator in the back. You had to, and you were told to look at things on the label if you even looked at the label, and not just what was slapped on the front of a marketing package. Wasn't really the thing you should be focusing on. We were told to just look at the fat. And in my very first workshop in the series, Lose Weight and Not the Food, we actually talk about what is the most important thing on those labels and how to eat exactly the way these guidelines are saying. So these are all starting up in February, but I've got even something better for you before that. So stick around with me for a second here. So what's going on with the new guidelines? Protein is not treated like a side character, right? Everything was focusing on grains and carbohydrates and fat before. Have this, not that. But you know, protein was like, yeah, just have this amount. And in fact, the RDA for the protein at the time was just enough to keep you from getting diseased. It really wasn't enough to do everything in your body that protein needs to do. But now the new guidelines specifically prioritizes it for metabolic health. That is key because the biggest problem in our country today, right now, ultimately is metabolic health. The inflammation that drives the metabolic problems is the same that is behind all of these chronic diseases of inflammation we're experiencing today. Oddly enough, full fat dairy without added sugar is back at the grown-ups table, right? But that is something that I've been teaching all along. In fact, I was already reading the research that says, hey, well, this isn't the big deal. I prefer A2 milk and grass-fed cows and higher quality of that dairy? Yes, I do. But um, it's in the nuance, not what happens when they take fat out of dairy. That's the problem. The problem is that when you take it out, you have to add in thickeners, emulsifiers, preservatives, and sugars to make it still taste good. All right, so that's the issue there. Um, What else are they looking at? They're looking at whole foods, animal and plant whole foods. There, there's no ideology behind it. It's the acknowledgement that, for the most part, humans are biologically omnivorous, and if we choose to do vegan or vegetarian, or but specifically vegan, then there are extra requirements that need to be met, that they're finally acknowledging that, hey, it isn't going to have everything in it that you need. So here's some, in order to support a vegan ideological lifestyle, which is totally your choice. Here's what you need to do to help it make it work for you so that you don't get sick. And that's important, to not put the blinders on. We just have to be realistic that that's what our bodies are. And there's a lot of reasons why someone might choose to be vegan, for example. For the first time, the guidelines are clearly naming highly processed foods or ultra processed foods as a major problem. And part of the reason I think they were dancing around that in the past is because, hey, big food pays a lot of bills in the government. Okay, I'm sorry, big agriculture, big food, all of those guys, they have a stake in it. And we were having a very difficult time separating industry from policy and from what actually makes people healthy. And I'm not sitting behind those tables, and so I'm not the one having to navigate that. But I've uh, read some very interesting books: Sugar, Salt, Fat, Big Fat Surprise, Why We Get Fat, by a number of really fantastic authors that dive into all kinds, from the science, from the government, and from the industry side, all three of those sides of what is actually going on behind the scenes. And it's quite enlightening. Um, but so one thing that I think I've seen a lot online is the freaking out about the fats. All right, so that's why I started this the way I did. But the new guidelines still incorporate saturated fat limits. Um, whether or not that's necessary is still up in the air. Some people were very unhappy that there was a saturated fat limit. Um, but what we're seeing here now is that the emphasis has shifted. There is still a saturated fat limit, but the message isn't avoid this one nutrient and you're going to be fine. It's now eat your real food, um, that your physiology recognizes, that your body recognizes as real food, and stop outsourcing your nourishment to factory foods, right? That's a big change. That's a big deal. And I've always been about eating real food and helping you learn how to do that, and still finding even those convenience foods in the stores that still meet that need and that are better options. So that's great. We get to work on that part. So if you're sitting here thinking, wait, this sounds like what we've been doing already with you, Steph. Yeah, you're right. It does. Because these principles, like I said at the beginning, they're not new to human biology. They're just new to federal policy. And I didn't have to scramble to update anything in my custom fit wellness program that's going to be starting soon. So, it's just that um, the policy has finally caught up to the science of our physiology that we've been honoring all along. I do want to point out that there are people who are concerned about the cost of real food. I want to point out that my favorite aspect of all of this is that because this is now policy, that these guidelines have always been about informing federal policy and providing nutritious foods. And when we were following it before, we could provide foods in our schools and in public institutions that really wasn't healthful. I know a lot of doctors and hospitals that are absolutely appalled at the food that they have to feed their patients. I know that that might sound like a terrible thing to say, but it's truth. So the good news is that if the policy says we have to eat real food, guess what needs to be made available to people who maybe can't otherwise afford it? So this is a problem that now we have to figure out, and that is a good thing, because it's now going to finally make food that we just assumed wasn't going to be available to people available to them. All right. So here's where things really get fun. And what I want to start off by saying this week, this is the first in a four-part series. Instead of arguing about guidelines online, I want to propose that we just test them in real bodies with real food in real life. As I like to say in my custom fit wellness program, you get to eat your experiments. All right. So that's what we're going to be doing in this next round of custom fit wellness. We're going to be starting with a continuous glucose monitor very soon. So I would love for you to say CGM question mark down in the comments if you're interested in hearing more about it. I'll probably pop a link down there for you to read about it. But I want to be clear about this. This is not an AI app guessing what your body might do. This is not a pseudo personalized program. This is definitely not eat list because an algorithm said so. This is a small group. It is a real human coach. Hello, hello. It's real-time data interpretation that I get to help walk you through, and it's actually thinking and science applied to your metabolism and where your metabolism is today. This isn't just for people who are overweight. This isn't just for people who are going through menopause. I mean, anybody. I've had marathoners go through this program. I have had people who have diagnoses go through this program. I can't cure anything. I don't prescribe anything. I don't diagnose anything. This is important to understand. It's information, but you get to learn about your body and understand what foods work for you. Not good foods or bad foods, but what foods work for you. We're looking at your data, we're getting some insight, and you get to take action on that. So again, I'm a scientist first. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to diagnose or prescribe anything. I'm a scientist. I'm also a culinary and nutrition expert. I'm also a master health coach. And I'm someone who personally chooses to live and breathe metabolic health and inflammation reduction because of my own health history. And my job is to help you discover what your body is responding to and then help you turn that information into something that you can actually live with. And this is a time of year where we're all thinking about how to, your New Year's resolution. You may be trying to think about, well, should I do a GLP-1? Should I not do a GLP-1? Before you do anything like that, I highly recommend getting to understand what your body is doing. There is not a person that I can think of, unless you are already in perfect metabolic health, which is great, by the way, then you don't need this program. Even if you've done a continuous glucose monitor before, it's great to check in at least once a year and see how things are going for yourself. Um, so there you go. I am going to provide that information for you. We're going to be getting started soon. The very first week of the program is really just setting up and getting your monitor. So we're not doing anything yet. So it is not too late to join. And if you're at all curious, I want you to reach out. But today was about why the rules changed. Next time, tomorrow, I'm going to be doing this. We're going to talk about the real villain that we were distracted from the whole time. We're going to talk about ultra processed food a little bit and how to move away from it without blowing up your life. And, because it's not about perfection. We're actually about trying to align what we're doing with what our body needs. And so the guidelines are starting to finally support that. And I'm going to walk through some of what's actually in the guidelines where it comes to ultra processed food and the science that they're using. So, um, looking forward to hearing from you. I want to know from you guys, what are your questions? Are you familiar with the guidelines? What are you seeing? Does it make you nervous? I want to know because I want to start incorporating your questions and your curiosities into the next three parts of the dietary guidelines. Today was part one. We've got parts two, three, and four coming up, and I will see you soon.